everybody, and welcome to this special panel titled Intersectional Pride, Voices of Asian American, Latine, Latinx, and Black LGBTQ Voices in Fresno and the Central Valley. As Marsha P. Johnson famously once said, "No pride for some of us without liberation for all of us." Her words have since been used by trans and queer racial justice organizers all around the world. Her words speak from her positionality as a Black woman, as a trans woman, and as someone who's experienced both belonging and unbelonging in LGBTQ communities and elsewhere. She, like many who experience the intersections of race, sexuality, gender, and so forth, work to create communities of love and support for those marginalized. It is in this spirit that we wanted to hold this special panel today. In this panel, we are wanting to center on the diversity of our LGBTQ plus community in Fresno. We have here a wonderful panel of community members and activists and leaders today. And I would first like to introduce the panelists, and then we'll start with our opening questions. So we have here Alexandria Ben. She goes by she, her. Born and raised from Los Angeles, relocated to Fresno 10 years ago, lucky us. Her passion is poetry and community. She is a former president of Pan-African Student Union. Her passion for community is rooted through art, culture, community, and love. We have here Shai Chang. They go by they, them pronouns. Shai identifies as queer, trans, non-binary, and Hmong. They graduated from Fresno State with a bachelor's in sociology, a minor in peace and conflict studies, and a certificate in social justice and social change. They co-founded Queer Hmong Intersectional Pride, or Q-HIP. It was founded through the power of community, love, and healing. Shai is now currently working at Hmong Innovative Politics as the queer and trans lead. We have here Alex Sanchez. He goes by the pronouns he or L. He is a Latino Hispanic community advocate who grew up in rural Fresno County. Alex works to serve the LGBTQ community and those servicing homelessness by focusing on housing and affirmative health care access. He is the chair of Fresno Madera Continuum of Care Lived Experience Advisory Board, which strives to ensure homeless people's voices are taken into account when building the framework for new homelessness services. Alex is also the program coordinator of Fresno Barrios Unidos, leading the Brown Boy Love program that aims to educate and support Hispanic, Latino, LGBTQ plus men ages 18 to 24 in Fresno County. We have here Dion Foster, whose pronouns are he, him, his. He is an adjunct lecturer at Fresno State for the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Department. Dion has served on LGBTQ plus panels for the Cross Culture and Gender Center at Fresno State, where he discussed navigating as a Black queer man in higher education and in Fresno County. He was also a member of the Anti-Racism Committee at Fresno State's Department of Communication, where he promoted diversity within the department. Dion also produced research in this field, focusing on the intersectionality of race, gender, and sexuality of marginalized groups. Last but not least is Vana Nok. Pronouns are he and him. He is a part-time lecturer of Asian American Studies in the Department of Anthropology at Fresno State, and the full-time faculty and program coordinator of Ethnic Studies at Madera Community College. At Madera Community College, he is charged with creating the first Ethnic Studies program for the college. While as an undergraduate student at Fresno State, he advocated for more Asian American Studies courses and directed the first Asian American Pacific Islander Film Festival in the Central Valley. As a first-generation queer Khmer college student, he lived briefly in San Francisco and has earned his MA at San Francisco State. So here we have an amazing panelist of incredible voices, and I'm so excited and so grateful for you to share this space with us today. So I'd like to first open up a space for Alexandria to share some of your art with us.
Thank you. So this poem is called Pride. Scared to say the word gay, but we not. We are your family, friends, co-workers, and even elected officials. We loud, we hear, we exist, and we matter. Years on years of persecution and discrimination and hate, spewed because of ignorance and hate, Haven't y'all learned when you persecute communities for just being themselves that it just don't work? Your words create ruins in our communities. How can you try to control who I love or if I choose to bring forth life? Just understand, hate transfers over to our communities, and we hear you loud and clear. The only thing that can bring peace to our communities is love and understanding. Use your voice to advocate. Use your voice to protect. Use your voice to bring love and not hate. You see the state of our country right now. All we see is hate running across every TV screen. Even despite the hate, love has always been here. You have to be that light. Let me say it again. You have to be that light in dark places, because if you don't, who will? Let this be a message for everybody. Even as elected officials, your words hold weight. Everything you say publicly and in private matters. So be accountable for what you say and what you do. And be careful with your words. And just know, we have been here this whole entire time. We aren't going anywhere. We are your mothers. We are your sisters. We are your brothers. We are your fathers. We are your doctors. We are your teachers. Everywhere you go, you share space with us. So be considerate about the energy that you provide. Just in case you need a reminder today, we are here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly powerful and beautiful. So I want to first open up the space. I'm going to ask the same questions to all of you, but I want to first start with Alexandria. How would you describe the communities you interact with and connect with? Let's first start with that. How would you describe the communities that you interact with and connect with as an LGBTQ person of color?
So it took me a while to actually know that I was bisexual. For a long time, I kind of just hid it or just denied it that it even existed. And it was my friends that actually brought it forth and like told me it's okay to be yourself and to be open, and it's okay to identify with who you really are.
Yeah.
So it took me a long time, but I think it was my community, it was my friends that really just brought me to the point where I am now.
Oh my gosh. And how do you navigate particularly LGBTQ designated spaces as a person of color, as a LGBTQ person of color?
I say you guys gotta be proud, you gotta be loud, you gotta make sure you stand out, you know, because that's all that it is. We're supposed to shine, we're supposed to be here, and that's all that matters, you know. So many times we hide who we are because we're scared of other people and how they may perceive us, and that's not how you're supposed to live, you know. You take away from yourself when you deny a part of yourself.
That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Shy. You're a little nervous, I know, but don't be. I'm going to ask you the same question. First, how would you describe the communities you interact and connect with, as well as how do you navigate LGBTQ spaces as an LGBTQ person of color?
Yes, thank you for the question. As a queer Hmong person navigating the spaces that I'm in, typically in Hmong spaces, it's been very difficult for me. This patriarchy runs very strong in Hmong communities, and it's very difficult for me to feel like I can truly exist as myself. I'm actually not out to my parents, although my family and X, Y, and Z, whoever may know, I still organize hella in the community, so I'm like, it's funny, it's so interesting. I'm queer as fuck outside. When I'm home, I'm like, oh, I'm straight, right? And it's still very hard for me. I think that I'm still navigating even now what it really means for me to really exist as a queer Hmong person and really wanting to be all of me. I think especially growing up and when my grandpa passed away, it was very difficult for me because it felt like I really had to choose between being queer or being Hmong. Like I had to choose between letting go of my family or letting go of myself. Mm-hmm. And it was a very horrendous time. And it's also when I started to really seek out queer Hmong spaces, and so that's really when, through the power of Hmong Debating Politics, they were able to help secure me like $5,000 to really just create a Hmong and queer space, and that's where queer Hmong intersectional pride comes in. And so honoring Kimberly Crenshaw with the word intersectionality, right? And so honoring what it means for us in our history and all of the queer folks who have come before. And so we really work on what it really means to heal together as a queer community through all our different traumas that we have gained from internalizing all of the oppressions, but also all of the folks that like have oppressed us.
Could you share a little bit more about how queer Hmong intersectional pride like started? Like, where did the seeds come from?
Yeah, it was really like it was a bunch of queer people, right? And we like Vasmer came in from Texas, and then it was just like the right people at the right time coming together, and us coming in power building together. And we literally met once a week for like 2 to 3 hours, and then right after we'll go out and like we'll drink or we'll go hop in and socialize, right? And so it was like once a week we'll see each other. And so it wasn't until the Hmong New Year's when literally like it was our first time a queer Hmong booth at the Hmong New Year's. Like, and honestly that might have been the first time ever that there was a queer Hmong booth at the Hmong New Year's. And people were so in love and in support, but it was also so difficult because here we are feeling like the world hates us and feeling like such an internalized oppression within us that it was really hard for us to even accept that people do love us and accept us. And it's still in the conversations, we were still fearful of the world, yet the world loves us? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
It's like that, right? And so from there, 15 people, 20 people, we just started growing and members and in numbers, and we met like once a week, every single week for like hours on end. Just really creating spaces for us, healing for us, and really taking up spaces like sports day, right? Really dismantling what it means for toxic masculinity to exist in sports, and why is it that as queer people we can't see ourselves in it. And so it was just so much healing work, just sharing stories, narratives, shifting movements through narratives. And so
That's wonderful. Alex, I'm going to ask the same question. How would you describe the communities you interact and connect with, as well as how you navigate spaces, particularly LGBTQ spaces, but spaces in general, as an LGBTQ person of color?
So I feel like it's complex answers. So I'm a program coordinator and I work for Fresno Barrios Unidos. I lead the program Brown Boy Love. So this is a specific program for queer, gay, bi, trans men 18 to 24 who are Hispanic. So it's one of the few places where Hispanic queer men have a place to come to get educated, to talk about, you know, the different intersectionalities of what it's like to be Hispanic and part of the LGBT community. I feel like there aren't enough spaces for that, and so I'm very privileged to be able to lead that, and it's a great experience. Personally, I feel like I go back and forth. So I moved to Fresno about 5 years ago. I was experiencing homelessness, and so, you know, a wild thing in that is when I tell people, I was like, yeah, I was homeless, there was all these things that happened, but out of all these negative things, a very positive thing happened, and it was being able to be away from, you know, my family and other communities that, you know, didn't allow me to be myself. And so when I came to Fresno, I was able to, you know, accept myself, not only as who I am, but like how I present myself to my community. And for the most part, I live stealth unless I'm doing, which is really funny. You know, Shai and I have that in common. Like, I do all this work with all these nonprofits in the LGBTQ community, but like, unless you have heard me share my story, you're not gonna know. I like to joke around and say, you know, the girls that get it, and the girls that don't. And so, you know, I live here in Fresno, but I still do go back to my hometown, which is Mendota, and it's about like 98% Hispanic. There's a very specific culture there than there is here in Fresno, because it is a lot smaller, it's very rural, very religious based. Even though there are a lot of religions, They're all very anti-LGBTQ. In the recent years, it has like gotten better and more accepting. But being a trans person, myself as a transgender man, that's very different from being gay, bi, or queer or lesbian. So when I go there, the people who don't know me, obviously, they're assuming that I'm cishet, but a lot of small towns, everybody.
Yeah.
And so, how I navigate myself here in Fresno, where there's no worries, I say whatever I want. When I go to Mendota to visit friends or family, it's kind of like I put on the cishet privilege, and and so like I move that way. So I don't bring up anything about the LGBT community. Like it's kind of like time and place. I know that's not the place for me to do it, but that's the reality. And then the funny thing is, here in Fresno, I love that there are all these queer spaces or LGBT spaces. Myself, I don't identify as queer, but I love being in them. But oftentimes, coming from a community that is mostly Hispanic, it feels isolating. There are Hispanic people in Fresno, but there isn't the culture that there was, like what I experienced growing up. And so being like the only, Hispanic person, I don't want to say brown person, because I obviously have privilege, but being like oftentimes the only Hispanic person in like, administrative offices or like management teams or, on different board, for different organizations, it's, kind of wild in a sense. I'm like, we're in Fresno, where are all the brown people, where are all the black people, why am I the only one here? Why am I the only one who speaks Spanish? Why am I the only one who, all these different things. And it can be lonely, but I've learned to grow from that and like figure out where my place is and like find my niche.
We're gonna get back to everything you said. Thank you so much. Vana, I would like to ask this same question to you. How would you describe communities you interact and connect with, as well as how you navigate LGBTQ spaces as an LGBTQ person of color?
Yeah, so my name is Banano, and I'm the son of refugees, Khmer refugees in particular. I come from a community that has been in exile, which means that a lot of our ethnic cosmology is something that many of us still carry, including myself. So in many ways, I do find a sense of safety within my ethnic community. In some cases, more so in the queer community. It's because when I'm with them, I feel like there are certain cultural nuances that they understand that sometimes the diverse LGBTQ community don't understand because they're so diverse. So there are certain things where when I'm around my ethnic community, I don't have to explain certain things, they just kind of understand certain things. So in many ways, it's kind of nice because we're from our cosmology is the same. But then, and we're Buddhists, so there's that too. When I'm in the queer community, I think what I find comforting in the queer community is that I'm around people with the same sexual desires. So then I don't have to, and so there is that sort of mutual, there is that sort of, something about that is mutual, right? But beyond sexual desires, beyond sexual orientation, there are other things where it's hard for me to find sort of a connection with, and there's incongruencies. And so, especially here, I think in the Central Valley, where the Khmer community is a considerable size, but we're pretty big in comparison to other places, I guess, in the nation, but we're still small enough where we can easily be diluted. But then I do find comfort here in the Central Valley too, because a lot of my queer friends are Latinx and Latin A, right? And I think my connection with them is our socioeconomic status. A lot of us came from backgrounds where we're low income, and so in many ways I find comfort in that. And so, but queer spaces is also very hypersexualized, and that's where I get a little uncomfortable because the so your sexual orientation is one thing, but I feel like over time the queer community has morphed into its own culture. And unfortunately, from my experience, that culture is very, very sexualized. And then being Asian American, um, you know, I anyways have felt where I have been commodified. Um, and a lot of times these are by older men. And these are older men that sometimes we trust as well. And it's not to shame them because I think the culture has been so normalized that they don't realize that what they're doing to me is harmful. But there has to be some level of respect, you know, like I have been told by older men, white men and white passing men, like, why him, not me? And like, things like that, it's like, well, do I not have a say in who I want to, you know, have a relationship with and stuff like that? It's almost like it's a gift for all or something like that. And so sort of that, I think, you know, I know that this has a lot to do with Orientalism, and I understand all of that. But at the same time, it's like I find myself when younger Asian American reach out to me for mentorship, the first thing I always tell them is, you know, don't do anything that is going to compromise your values because you have to live for yourself after. Because, you know, being new to the queer community, I often feel like I don't know what I'm in for, and I have had to find out the hard way what it means to be sexualized. And so I don't want that for folks who come after me and who are younger than me, because it shouldn't, in my ethnic community, not everything is about sex. So then going to a community where everything is so sexualized, it's like, oh, like, so this is what community means to these folks. And I'm a little turned off by that at this time in my life, I guess. And I'm trying to make sure that I don't do things to perpetuate that. And that's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you for sharing that. We are going to touch back on that. Dion, I'm going to ask you the same question. How would you describe the communities you interact with and connect with, as well as how you navigate spaces as an LGBTQ person of color?
Well, I think I would start off by saying that racism and homophobia and heteronormativity or cisnormativity are things that affect all members of society and not just marginalized communities, whether if that's on a personal level or intrapersonal level or, you know, an institutional level. And I think that queer people of color face a unique and complex challenges when navigating in a world that may not accept many, if not all, of their identities. And how I would describe the way I interact or I connect with the world is that I feel that there is a lingering or a underlying sense of bias, of discrimination, and of like otherness, whether if it's something that's very blunt or something that's very, very subtle. And I not only face those things from the dominant society, but also through identities that I belong to. The Black community being very entrenched in homophobia, and the gay community highlighting and validating whiteness. And even in, like, with other Black gay men, I've been accused of that my demeanor, my mannerism, my education makes me very whitewashed. So I find it really hard to find that sense of commonality or solidarity with those communities. So typically, like, I find those things in like people where I experience less of those hardships of like feeling bias and stuff, and that's where I typically find my sense of community and how I try to navigate through those.
Thank you so much. Powerful truths. Thank you. So, part of the other question was, how do you describe your particular LGBT community and circle? I'd like to first start off with Shai. Shai, you've already sort of shared about it, but I would love to just sort of have you talk a little bit more about your particular LGBTQ circle of friends and community.
Thank you. I have been intentional with developing relationships that is supportive of me. And I think that it's also like through a lot of hardships, right? And a lot of like mistakes and a lot of like very, very deep like things, right? That I have to make sure that I'm with like people who are supportive of me. I think about what my brother said. He said that, and I have like I have 5 siblings, and we're all 1 year apart. And I remember him saying like, we all grew up together. We all went through the same thing. How is it that our lives are so different? You know? And I am very proud and very happy to have like friends and family who are super supportive of me. And it took a lot to get here. It took a long time to get here. And even through, like, and you know, I've been through QUIP, even with all the members and all the folks that went in and out. I think I'm in a place right now where I want to continue to develop the spaces that I'm in to shape morals and values and theories and that are in alignment with me, so that way communities can come in. I think that we've always been shaping spaces for communities, but wanting to also recognize that I am also a part of the community, and wanting to make sure that like I am developing my own leadership, my own engagement, and making sure that I'm developing my own organizing skills, so that way communities can then also then enter in. And for me to hold, and actually like with what Vanna was actually talking about too, I also wanted to be clear about like spaces that I'm also like engaging in. That like when we went to the Pride Parade community when we first formed, actually one of the comments that was made was like, when we didn't have a name yet, right? One of the comments being made was, "Oh, what's your name? Little gay Asian boys?"
That doesn't surprise me, but
Yeah.
also gross.
Yeah, right. And so lots of different microaggressions that exist, and so that's why it's like we had to form our own space. That's why we had to create our own space. Like, why is it that we have to create our own spaces, all of us, right? And so, yeah, we have a Facebook. People message us about those things too. They're all like, "Oh, I love Asians. If there's anything I could do to help you."
Right.
Yeah.
So when they say I love Asians, are they being supportive of the organization, or more like, do you have a number? Where are you going? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I think this is also a truth that is very much here and needs to be recognized. I'm going to go to Vanna, because we've kind of touched upon a lot about what you were talking about. So how would you describe the communities that, in your circle of friends and family, and how you navigate all that?
Yeah, so my circle of friends have changed over time, but it doesn't mean that I've let go of old friends. It's just when you're a first generation college student and now faculty, like the thing about education is it has a way of taking you away from community, but then bringing you right back to the communities that you left. You know, it's a full circle sort of thing. But the process of becoming is a complicated and complex one. And I remember there was a time right after high school when I started to form a group of queer Asian friends, Gaysians if you will, because we were all gay and we were all Asian men. And we were mostly Southeast Asian. We were all Southeast Asian: Hmong, Khmer, Khmu, I remember that time was so much fun. I think because there was just like this community where like we would go out to eat together and like we can share food and no one complained about the spice level. It was just kind of
That's telling.
those little things were kind of nice and but then we had to be intentional about finding each other. Like those things doesn't just happen and I was very intentional about bringing us together. And we all just really enjoyed each other's company, and we found spaces to congregate with other folks of color. So even though we were like a small Asian group, we would also like partying stuff where a lot of Latinx, Latinx, gays as well, and lesbians, because this was a time before like the non-binary thing started to really manifest. And become more more visible. So there was that, and then when I went to Fresno State, I found queer community among like queer intellectuals, and that was nice too. But then there was also a little bit of a difference because a lot of the queer folks I met in education, they came from a different background than my queer friends who weren't in education. There was some level of like acculturation that they had that my friends that weren't in education didn't have. And that doesn't mean to say that one is right and one is wrong, but my friends in education knew how to code switch, or they just came up a place where they just already fit in with American, hence white sort of society, because academia, let's face it, is very white. The way we talk, the people we interact with, we're taught to talk in ways that are very white. And so and that was nice too, to have that community there in academia, but sometimes it was kind of nice to revisit folks who weren't in academia sometimes, but they understood certain nuances that my friends, like third, fourth generation friends that I met in academia didn't understand. So there was like some of those like cultural differences as well. When I say culture, I'm not just talking about. I'm talking about all. It's complicated because there are like subgroups even within groups, and so that was sort of my experience with the community. I guess that was how I found community in various spaces. But then again, I also realized that academia and sort of that sort of society, that educated society, they do a lot of the same things that folks who aren't in education does, but then it's seen as more acceptable because of their privileges, right, and their status. But sometimes it's more toxic because now you're in this weird power relationship with them where you're not sure how to confront certain situation because you're interacting with folks with power. And so I'm learning to navigate that now. And also too, I'm now thinking about how do I model healthy relationship. And that's something in my process of becoming, that's something that I'm still learning how to do.
Thank you for sharing that. I think also your story speaks to, and just from listening to both you and Shai, of just the constant navigation, right? And the toll, right? I'd love to ask, again, the same question. I want to start with you, Alexandria. How would you describe your particular circle of friends and how have you found community?
So I want to start with my family first.
Yeah.
For me, I've always been family oriented. Like I've been raised that way.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing is I still haven't really came out to my mom yet. So it's like I am living on this bridge of like still accepting myself and not letting like my family dictate who I am. It was my friends, like when I came to Fresno, I created a whole new life for myself. All of my family's back in LA. And like I remember just growing up always hearing homophobic things. And I didn't know that I internalized those same ideologies. And it kind of like, I don't know, listen to you guys both speak. like that code switching. And the fact that like I still have to do that even with my own family. It was my friends that told me like you have to live unapologetically, because in the end you're gonna be mad at yourself if you die and you didn't get to live out your full potential because you were so scared about what people think of you or how they might perceive you, or if they just might outright just hate you because they don't understand you. So I think it's the community, like my friends just telling me to embrace myself. I'm hoping that one day I can get that strength and that courage to tell my mom, I'm bi as fuck. I know it's coming, but it's just like, I don't know. I'm thankful for that community because I found a piece of myself. I always felt like I was at home in the community. Like, I always knew, I like it here. Like, it's fun. Like, these people really accept me. But when I have to go home, it's just like, I don't talk about it. It's just like, it's something that just goes unseen. And it's sad because that shouldn't be a reality. It's like, I don't know, it's sad to say the Black community, it's like, this is not something new. We've been here this whole entire time. And it's like we refuse to still accept us. Like, I just can never understand how you can be mad at a child because of who they love. They weren't asked to be brought into this world. They didn't ask to love who they love, but that's what it is. So it's a complicated question. But
Absolutely. Well, as somebody who came here 10 years ago, how did you meet people and make friends?
because I'm friendly.
I really do. You're natural there.
It just really just getting into the community, like me being the president of the Pan-African Student Union, as well as being a part of the Associated Student Government for Fresno City. I was always interacting with a lot of clubs and a lot of community members. And I ended up going to Tower, like everybody else does. And something in me I felt home. I felt like, okay, like I'm safe. Like, I don't care what happens down the block. Like, in this little block of space, I'm safe. And I can be queer. I can be happy. I can be flirty. I can do what I want, So it's those little moments and those little places. Like, that will always be a huge place in my heart because that's where I found myself.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's a ringing endorsement for PAP. Let's go with Dion. I'm going to ask you the same question, and you run with it wherever you want to go. So how would you describe your community, LGBT community, or just community, circle of friends and family?
So with the queer community, my experience wasn't the best with the queer community. I had a hard time forming relationships, particularly with gay men. I don't know why our communication was off, and it was finding a hard time building relationships and communicating in general. And I started to realize that we were having such a hard time because in the world we live in and the identities that we had, we built these defense mechanisms to kind of protect ourselves that made it hard to form relationships. So most of the communities that I find solidarity in were actually from the straight community. All my friends and my family members are straight. And the way that we formed relationships wasn't really through my identities, it was just through our personalities. So my friends and I are very diverse. We don't have a lot of identities that are common, but our personalities are the same. But that's a good thing, but it's also a hard thing too, because when we do things together, they want to go into spaces that are mostly heterosexual spaces, and that's the spaces where I have to navigate and negotiate my personality so I can be in a space where I'm safe, a space where I don't offend others. I have this problem particularly with straight men who I first started to meet. They confuse my politeness with flirting. So I'm always in that space where I have to negotiate and navigate.
Absolutely. And bringing in your communications, I've been hearing through the panel about code switching. Could you talk a little bit about how that impacts you, or talk about code switching a bit?
I don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I did in my earlier youth. I would do a lot of the twitching through like the things I wore at particular events, the way that I would try to present myself. But as I got older, it was exhausting playing these two personas. You know, the one I presented to the world, and then the one who I really was. So I just one day thought I'd rather be hated for who I am than accepted for something I'm not.
That's powerful. Right? Yeah. Your goosebumps. Alex, I'm going to ask you the same question. How would you describe your particular LGBT community circle of friends and family?
I would say it took a long time to get to where I am with this group of friends. Again, I came to Fresno in the middle of a crisis, so a lot of the people that I came around were not queer or didn't identify as part of the community. A lot of them were cis-het. A lot of the friends that I made were through necessity because I was trying to survive. I was always the only queer person in the room. In a sense, you could say the only queer person because to them, everything that isn't straight or cisgender is queer. It was negative, so having to like navigate that where like, you know what, I am not going to negotiate my safety. I would rather be safe than to speak out about something because oftentimes I was outed in a lot of places. Oftentimes I was met with violence and, you know, very depressing, but I was like a victim of a hate crime, not by straight people, by people part of the LGBT community, which is very wild. A lot of people are like, hey, Alphabet Mafia, aren't you supposed to like be together? And I'm like, yeah, it should be like that, but the reality is it isn't. But I've come a long way from that. You know, I've done a lot of healing and being able to find people who, you know, it wasn't a means of survival. I'm no longer in a place where I'm fighting to survive. I'm in a place where, you know, I'm stable, I'm thriving, I have this great job, and meeting all these great people is awesome. And like I came to Transemotion as somebody who was like seeking services, and now, you know, I volunteer alongside and been able to call, you know, people on the board, not just, you know, acquaintances, but family. That is wholeheartedly who I call my family. They were my family when I had them, when my family turned their back on me. And they were, you know, also mentors to me. Sorry, my voice is breaking. So, you know, they have, you know, seen me through a lot of things. And I am very grateful because I know a lot of people don't have that opportunity. And then as I've grown even more, I have, you know, been able to find people from small communities around Mendota, like Fireball and Kerman and San Joaquin, that, you know, even if they weren't straight or if they were queer, it is a sense of like a relationship and a friendship that like goes even deeper, because even though they were small towns around each other, it was very culturally similar. And so, you know, in places like that, I don't have to code switch, even if my friends aren't, you know, part of the LGBT community. I can, you know, in the middle of a sentence, just start speaking Spanish, and they're still gonna understand me. You know, they're not gonna be like, "What do you mean?" I can make jokes with them that other people would not understand. You know, and I don't have to translate things because sometimes Spanish doesn't always translate over as well in English. And so, you know, loving the people that I was grateful and privileged enough to come across, who not only advocated for me as a person who needed to survive, but also, you know, advocated for me to be able to live my life and thrive. I'm very grateful for that. And, you know, I do still, you know, acknowledge my privilege because I do walk into the room assumed as cishet, and I like that privilege. And I will cling on to it for as long as I can until I feel safe enough or like I want to, you know, decide to share with anybody. I am the kind of person who I personally do not believe in like coming out. I feel like you just live your life. Though being a trans person, it's a little different because transitioning medically, I couldn't just do that with my family. Just be like, hey, and then like one day I'm like growing facial hair or something. And you know, although my family isn't accepting, I love them very much, and I know they love me in their own way. And I've been able to grow and not seek their acceptance, because in the beginning it was very hard to make friendships, genuine friendships, because I couldn't get over, you know, wanting acceptance from my family. You know, my family is very religious when I grew up. Even though they're no longer associated with the church, they still have these ideals, and, you know, this indoctrination. So that contributes to that homophobia, but, you know, I meet them where they are, and I am at my point in my life where if I feel like, you know, this isn't serving me, like, I love you so much, but, you know, I need to do what's best for me, I'm comfortable with doing that, and there's no longer that guilt. So, and that was 100% because of the people who were around me, who showed me, you know, how to be healthy in relationships, how to be a healthy person, how to do all these things, you know, all these firsts that I never experienced, you know, growing up poor, in a small rural town, you know, and it's been an experience. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm happy to have, you know, my family with me.
So I'm gonna keep going with you, Alex, because you're out and go into the next question, which kind of fits with well what you're talking about. Is what are the places or spaces around Fresno that you feel belonging to or feel at home?
Off the bat, I can say Transmotion. Again, like the people that I consider my family, they're board members. This is somewhere familiar. This is somewhere safe. I will be honest. The first time I came to Fresno and I came to a support group for Trans Emotion, it was super fucking white. It was
Still,
super,
like it's
still very white, but like it was super fucking white. I was the only brown person in the room, and when I say brown, I mean like literally everyone was very physically white. And like their understanding of, they also weren't homeless, so they or never experienced homelessness. So there was like that sense of like, you know, this is very frightful. Very threatening. I'm not gonna be here. So I dipped, but I came back. I came back because, you know, I couldn't find community in the friends that I did have, you know, in the means of survival, and they didn't understand what it was like to be trans and homeless. They only understood what it was like to be homeless. And so I went back to the support groups, and I kind of sucked it up. In the beginning, it was a transition. It was culture shock, literally. The culture here is different, and then being in a room full of white queer people is also very different. Being, you know, a Mexican man from a rural town who's also transgender. Because I am transgender, but I'm the kind of person that I'm like, oh, I just so happen to be transgender, and I don't see eye to eye, and because of that violence from my own community per se, it was very hard to connect. But I'm so happy to see the changes in the last 5 years that have happened. You know, it is still very white, but luckily enough, I joke around with my friends. I'm like, y'all are my white friends, but you don't commit microaggressions against me, so that's why I fuck with you. That's why y'all are my family, and it is really awesome. I was able to come to the LGBT center, and like that's where I met a friend who turns out was part of like a small rural town from Fireball, and so she's freaking awesome. She's, you know, Hispanic and queer, and, you know, finding my places in each of these nonprofits, which again is a huge privilege because I know so many people who, you know, they couldn't beat homelessness, they couldn't find people who advocated for them, and so, you know, being here where I am grateful to have found my places, and I feel like, Brown Boy Love, I take my experience and I try to, create that for, the individuals who do decide to go through the program. It is an educational thing, but it's also a sense of wanting to bring community, like whatever that looks like for you. And I am so happy to see it flourishing. It's brand new, but I'm happy to go into these places and have the privilege that I do and shake it up. Having the privilege of looking cishet, I get away with a lot more things than when I didn't get assumed to be cishet. And so it's really awesome to see that change in the last few years. It has time to change. I want a lot of more things to change, but everything that I do is intentional. I had to heal myself first, and that was a huge thing to do. Obviously, healing isn't linear, and it's like ongoing for some folks, but it's at a place where I want to return to my roots, and I'm able to do that without being triggered. And so that wouldn't have been the case if I didn't find these organizations and these people and that advocated for me. So I'm not a kind of person that parties either. So like a lot of queer places are in Tower, and I'm like, oh, like I went to the club for the first time a year ago, and so I don't like to be in like places with alcohol or dancing or things like that, because it's just uncomfortable for myself. I'm not that person. So finding sober places where food wasn't also surrounded, and it's just connection. Finding support groups is the huge reason why I was able to find community, like figure out who I am, share who I am, and not be judged.
I'm going to ask the same question to you, Vana. What are the places or spaces in and around Fresno that you feel belonging or at home?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, so for me, I think growing up with a hybrid identity, it took me a while to realize that home have always been right underneath my nose. But now that I realize that, there is code switching, and sometimes code switching can also be exhausting, but I've learned to compartmentalize these things and just see it as tools to navigate. So when I labeled code switching as a tool, I realized that, I'm not being fake. I'm using the tools to navigate in this very diverse sort of spaces, if you will, or a nation state, or ethics studies we call it empire, right? But also too, I come to realize that my ethnic cosmology and the cosmology that I'm learning to navigate here in the U.S. empire are two different universes. And so recognizing that I'm a part of two universes, I think helped me realize that I am a hybrid identity, and that I think the most challenging part has been more so negotiating the values between those two cosmologies. And I think for a long time, the conflation of both kind of messed me up, because I wasn't sure how to negotiate. But now that, and this is years in the making, now that I have a better understanding of my hybridity, I know that home has always been underneath my nose. And for instance, recently I went to a Khmer concert, and a very famous Khmer artist came, named Katsukim, and I was there with a lot of the elders and some other folks who are close to my age, and there was just something about the aura of the room that just felt like home to me. The music, the way we dance, the embodiment of the folks in the space just felt very natural for me. And I realized this is home. This has always been home. And so is the other spaces that you're navigating in the queer community and in your professional life. It just looks differently, and this is what it means to be a hybrid. It means to have multiple identities, and also to that I can have this cosmopolitan life and not feel ashamed about it. And so I guess I found home when I realized that, you know, like I can have more than one identity, and that being a hybrid doesn't mean that I'm betraying one identity over the other, and that having a cosmopolitan lifestyle is okay.
Thank you so much. It's really powerful. I love you saying home was right under me. That's beautiful. I'd like to go to Dion and ask the same question about what are the places or spaces in and around Fresno that you feel at home?
I think it's more about the people I'm with where I find home. So usually my friend groups or families who I connect really well with, wherever we are, that's where I feel a sense of home. But if I had to choose a place, I think I would say Splash, because I do love dancing, I do love to drink and hang out with my friends. And even though like I don't find commonality or solidarity in a lot of the queer folks that go there, it may sound silly, but I find a comfort seeing them have those things, even though I may not experience it as myself.
We should go to Splash. I didn't know you like to go. Sorry, I'm like inviting myself to your fun stuff.
Why wait tonight?
Right, exactly. Let's go with you, Shai. Like you spoke so much about how, particularly with queer Hmong intersectional pride of building community, but I would love to just ask you, just in general, for your own self, what places or spaces in and around Fresno that you feel at home?
It's movable. I think it's so many different ways. Home is with my family, home is with my friends, and home is with my work actually, and I'm very in a place of privilege to be able to say that and name that. Home is Splash, and unfortunately, you know, home is definitely Legends.
Yeah. Peace.
I know. Hashtag revive Legends. Okay. But you know, and definitely it is Tower District. It is Fresno. I've come to love Fresno, and to be able to meet all the people where they're at too. And home is within myself, and it's been it's been a journey for me to be able to say that too, because I have always, and I'm also saying this because I think it's so important as well. Like the Hmong community have only been here not even 50 years, 1975 on, right? And so my parents are that old, right? And so I've always have wondered where the queer elders are. Why is it that when I was young there was no queer spaces for Hmong people? Why was it that when I was growing up I never felt like I did belong or did feel like there was a home somewhere? And so I am in a place where I want to create that, right? And also recognizing that in the 90s and also early 2000s that there was a lot of queer Hmong folks who committed suicide. There was 2 lesbian couples who tied themselves together and threw themselves into Lost Lake, right? Because their parents and their families was not accepting of them. And so uplifting and naming all of those and recognizing that home is also with them, that I can also have home and be there for them too.
That's beautiful. I didn't even knew that history. My gosh. Whew. Alexandria, I'm gonna ask you that question. I already know that you like fab, but like, what are the places and spaces around Fresno that you feel at home?
So it took me a while to actually find my place and to know where I belong. So my start came with Fresno City. That's where I found out that it took me in the direction that I'm headed now. So it was the people, and I had to find home within myself because I was uncomfortable with who I was. I had a lot of learning to do, even though I was stubborn and I thought I knew everything. So, of course, Legends. That was the first club that I ever went to. I actually had fun. The first club I spent birthdays at, and then I led the tower. So, if anything, I say home is within me, and you know, it's just about the places that you go and the people that you meet. You just gotta appreciate them while you have them.
So this is the closing question, and then we're gonna leave it open for our audience to ask a couple questions. And I'm gonna just open it up to all of you, so you kind of just basically start speaking, so you don't have to worry about me calling on you. But what are some hopes that you have and would like to see for your communities and LGBTQ communities as a collective in the future? What are some hopes you have?
I'll go first.
Yeah, go for it.
Coming from a small rural town and doing the healing work that I've done, and you know, creating the spaces here and being able to do all this work, I want to go back home. I want to give my community and the younger kids that I do know that have reached out to me, the teachers that are like, thank you so much for posting on social media. I still have my old social media from before transition, and they're like, thank you so much for posting this stuff, because you know, you're educating me, and now I know how to help the students who are, you know, showing like little bits of, you know, clues, and they're not sure if they can come out. They don't know if it's safe, and I want to go back there. I want to go, you know, make sure that there are spaces specifically for them that are safe, that, you know, are not run by people who say they're supportive and then they're committing like hella fucking microaggressions. Cause like at the end of the day, machismo is a fucking thing still, and it's like super huge, and I have to check myself on it a lot. And I hope that my younger siblings have that place, and they don't have to go through what I went through with my family, but also the community. A lot of kids I went to school with, we all knew who was gay and who was queer and everything, but no one said anything. None of us told each other anything, and you know, there was a lot of bullying and harassment, and it's not as bad, but I want to make a space specifically for, you know, Hispanic rural towns, especially folks who are Spanish speaking or who have the background of being an immigrant or dreamers. I don't have that, you know, background. You know, I am second generation. My parents were first generation. I'm second generation, and so living in Mendota, it's like a huge thing. A lot of folks are immigrants, or a lot of folks as well are undocumented and like freshly here, and I want to make a space that's safe for them. I know there's this one, like, in my head, trailblazer. His name is He, and he actually had a news article, 2 news articles written on him, because he was out loud and proud. He's a gay Hispanic man who came from Mexico, and you know, because of him being out loud and proud, it was able to get better. And I would like to go give the educational and like funding resources to continue that progress. And then I would like to see Fresno, the overall LGBT community, because let's face it, like there are Hispanics here, but they're also white passing, they act like they're white. And so I would like to see that, and this is my own personal opinion and people can have their own, I would like queerness not to be the center of everything. I am tired of that because I don't identify as queer, and I feel like because I don't identify as queer, I'm not welcomed in spaces as often or as like open, open-minded. I 100% respect the people that came before me, because without them, I wouldn't be able to like live the life that I do and have the community that I do. But I also feel like, like what Vana was saying, like everything's about fucking sex. It's grinder and hookup culture, and it's tiring. And I want us to like feel like a community that isn't based around sex. It isn't based around, substance use. It isn't any of these things. And it's not to shame anybody. Like, girl, you do you. That's what I always say. You do you, and I would just like it to, we connect as human beings, especially because I have found cishet people that are really fucking awesome. But I would like the community one day to be more welcoming to different communities of color, Asian communities, African American communities, Hispanic communities, because it is so white and it is so tiring to like code switch that at times I'm like, fuck it, I'm tired. I don't feel like, playing your rules to spare your feelings. I'm gonna tell you how it is. And it is what it is, and you do with your feelings what you want to do with them. So I really do hope that in the future, places like, the queer Hmong intersectional pride and like everywhere else, like we don't have to, of course it's awesome to be in these small communities, but we don't have to only be here. We don't have to only exist in those small spaces. So I would like to see that, the white gays give us the mic because y'all had your run.
Wrong mic now.
Anybody else would like to share? Yeah, go
Yeah.
for it, Mona.
Yeah, so I just want to comment that I think we're in a time right now where we're trying to build allyship. For instance, we're all here. I think to some extent because of that. I can be wrong, at least that's what my intentions are. I hope for the future that folks of color and as well as some white allies really try to relearn what allyship looks like and redefine allyship. Because too often I notice that allyship take on a very neoliberal model and it becomes very transactional sometimes and even exploitative. And so how do we be very critical of the implications of that sort of model of allyship. And maybe sometimes allyship isn't always creating space in a white space for folks of color. Maybe allyship is white allies supporting those spaces and allowing those spaces to be private to those folks. Because sometimes it's not always, oh, I'm an ally, I'm going to show up in your space. Sometimes it's, how can I help you establish your space? How can I help you nurture your space? How can I, use my leverage to make sure that, that you guys have this sort of privacy in your space? Because for me, I often felt like allyship can be transactional. And I remember my aunt once told me, she's like, love should never be 50-50, but now, like, sometimes it's 70-30 because when it comes from the heart, it's never going to be even. Because when it's even, it's transactional. And that's always stayed with me, and my mom has always told me the same thing. And so when I see this very transactional way of building allyship, I start to question, the intent. And so for me, my suggestion to the future is to redefine and just unlearn to relearn what allyship look like. And for example, recently, Dr. Kat Colbert sent me, what she written to get a grant. And for me, that was very meaningful because now she's redefining allyship. She's helping me, if I want to build something from, if I want a grant, she's literally handing over her tools to me without anything in return. And sometimes that's what allyship looks like. It's giving tools to people who have been underserved, who don't have all the resources, and not expecting anything in return. And so I want to redefine allyship, but for the future generation, particularly Khmer youth, who are up and coming and learning who they are here in the U.S. empire, I want them to know that feeling when we come across each other, that sense of that essence, where it's like I see you, that's real. I know that, and I want you to know that, to hold on to that feeling, because I know how it's like to come across another queer Khmer person and we see each other across the room and it's like we know, like I'm Khmer too, and for me that's such a beautiful feeling, and I want them to know that that's a real feeling, and to hold on to that, and to know that you know, I remember reading this quote where it goes, like wildflowers, we continue to grow in places unexpected. And so I know that we are growing in this, for me, the Mono and Yokat land, right? But we are here, and that essence that you feel is real. And I hope that you do come find me, and that you do continue to find each other. But even if you don't, know that that sense of kindness that you feel, it's real, because I feel it too.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, my hopes and dreams for the future is that I hope that there are more queer spaces for youths. That we don't have to go to Legends and Splash, which is 21 plus, right, to really find our place of home. That there is places that exist for folks under 21, and also spaces outside of dating apps. I think that a lot of, I would say I think words like that, but I don't want to make any assumptions. But there are spaces, and it feels like we do sometimes have to go into dating apps to really feel like we can find acceptance, like desirability equating to acceptance, but it's not always like that. And so recognizing and also uplifting and really hoping and dreaming that queer spaces can continue to exist and thrive. I know that there has been a lot of queer spaces that have folded over, so
Anybody else? Brianna,
I feel like my
Alexander?
words were taken away. I'm just trying not to cry.
Okay. Brianna, would you like to say?
I guess what I would hope to see for the future are like not really new concepts, like things just like quality, inclusiveness, representation. I think, I don't know if this is my bias as being a queer media adjunct professor, but representation of like queer people of color would be something that would be a tool that would be able to help the more dominant population. Most of the time I see Black gay men as either, somebody struggling with HIV or Jeffrey Dahmer victims. So it's hard to have like positive or accurate representation of something that I can really identify with. So I think that would be something that would be useful for Black gay men.
Absolutely. So I'm going to open up the floor to the audience. If anybody would like to have a question?
For Dion, you mentioned earlier, if I understood, that the group of Black men you were with did get along because of your mannerism.
Yes. So there were times, a lot of times actually, where I would meet other Black gay men, and we would not connect or didn't really have commonality that people would think we would have because we were both Black and gay. We were very different in the sense of like, how we presented ourselves, our experiences, I guess. But a lot of times they have said that like I act white or I'm trying to be white because of the way that I dress and because I have a master's degree and just my whole demeanor.
I see Alex nodding his head a lot. So you're here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I want to clarify what I said earlier, because I'm nodding my head when Dion is saying that people told him that he acts white, and so I've been told that by Hispanic folks from my community, but like, yo, tienes el nopal en el frente, which is like, it translates to like you have the like cactus on your head. So basically, like remembering that you're Mexican, you're not white, and so when I come to a place like Fresno, when I say like Hispanics here, Hispanic gay men here act white, it's like they cling on to their white passing privilege, and like they act so similarly to what they believe is how they have to act to get ahead in life. And it's really hard when I come across Hispanic, like gay or trans men, and it's like, ooh, yeah, no. People are like, you should get along. Y'all are like super similar, and I'm like, no, they got their stuff, I got my stuff. Like, I tend to be around like women, they tend to be around men. A lot of the spaces we don't like see eye to eye. Like, it goes back to the machismo. Like, I come across a lot of gay and queer, like Hispanic men, and like they still have, that unchecked machismo ideals. And it's really hard because I'm the kind of person who's like really loud and will call that shit out.
Which I love about you.
And so I'm like, yo, that's not cool. Like, we're not gonna talk about women like that just because we're, queer or gay. Like, because gay men, for some reason, love a lot of people. Okay, I'm not gonna generalize. A lot of gay men that I've come in contact with in my own experience love to say a lot of negative things about women because they're gay, and they're like, oh, it's not bad because I'm gay and I like men.
Right.
And so that's just my experience. And so I just want to say, I'm sorry that's happened beyond, like, that is something that's like, I cannot relate to that because obviously like different backgrounds and stuff, but it is very frustrating is what I can
I
imagine.
just want to say, you should be proud that you have masters.
Well, we're
They're
definitely
jealous.
benefited from Fresno State, so there you go.
I think that one of the issues is that I find it still that like things that are like just being educated and being like I guess polite or stuff are associated with being white. So and it was just me just
That
being
has
myself.
nothing to do with it. They're jealous you have masters. And as far, I think things are slowly changing because this June, there was over 100 Fresno Unified students that marched in the gay parade. So things are slowly changing, slowly, but it is changing.
Does anybody else have any
I have
questions?
a question for
Yeah.
Shai. You said in the beginning that your parents don't know about your sexual orientation. And I wonder, it's like kind of a two-part question. Can you explain why, and do other family members know?
Yeah. So my parents are, my dad's a shaman, and then my mom they're both conservative about queerness. It's funny because they'll be like, oh, fuck Trump, and like, oh, you're gonna be marching at the the BLM. Okay, be careful. But I'll go and like look for a tape. I'm looking for a tape at my house, and I'm looking for a tape, and they'll be like, oh, that's really feminine, right? And so it's like the most liberal a conservative person can be. And so, but it's also the same thing similarly with like some of my other family members too. It's like, oh yeah, I'm totally okay that you're gay, but if my son had his ears pierced, I would not be okay with that, right? So it's like, where are we going here? Like, and so that's why it's really hard for me to also come out, because if we're really diving deeper into it too, I have tried to, and then my mom would be really upset by it, and then she would say things like, I should have never fed you, I should have never raised you. And so and like my dad would have said something similar to actually just recently. So it does get very hard. So like, how is it that I can come out, still have a relationship with them, because I still value them, and then I still value them, and I still value our relationship, and I still care about them a ton, right? And I think, how is it that I can still be a part of the family, right? Like, because it feels like if I come out, then I'm no longer a part of the family. Or like, also they're supporting me in like getting to buy a new car, right? So what would it mean if I come out to them before then, right? And then they were like, oh, actually, we're not going to be supporting you. right? Because a lot of my conversations with my dad has been very transactional. We've talked about that, right? Where I paid for your X, Y, and Z, or I gave you a house, I fed you, you grew up like this, right? You should be doing X, Y, and Z for me. And so it's very transactional. And sometimes I forget that it is transactional. When was the last time my dad or my parents asked me, how was your day? Or, and like I think it's just as like Asian or Hmong parents, or however you want to put it, it's been difficult, right?
Do you think it's different with Hmong as opposed to your?
Come here.
Yeah, so I'm Khmer.
I also wanted to clarify that this is me and my experience as a Hmong person, but I have also known other Hmong folks who have come out and the parents are super supportive. And I have come to know also that and I wish and I envy as well that other Hmong parents have also come are supportive of their child no matter what but it's also a twofold. It was oh yeah, I still love my child, but do I still wish they were straight? Yes, right. There's also things like that, right? And at the end of the day, do I still want them to be straight? Yes, right. And there's also have been instances within the Hmong community where folks have come out and the shaman would then do a ritual to see if something's wrong with them spiritually, right? Obviously nothing was wrong, or they'll say oh yeah, when you were being reborn, right? One of our aunties came into you and then they left and stuff like that, right? And so I also wanted to clarify that this is my experience, and my experience doesn't also dictate the other Hmong community members' experience, but definitely also wanted to uplift that there is ostracization, there is folks that sometimes are disowning there's there's a lot of anti-blackness in there, and so my sister had dated someone who was a person of color, and then my parents were super upset about that, right? It took years for them to just come into acceptance of it, and then the other side of it was that when I die, they won't be able to do anything for me, and I don't want them to do anything for me, right?
Do you see that changing as people are in the United States longer and educated here?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think so. I can't speak for them, but I do know some folks have had better relationships with their parents, and it may maybe be contributed because their parents do have some kind of educational background. But that's just kind of or it just because the child had a bachelor's, and so that's forgivable if you know what I mean? You have to be accomplishing something big for you to be able to come out. So I don't know, but I do see change happening, and I do see it slowly happening. So
Well, you mentioned before about about when Queer Hmong Intersectional Pride had it at the Hmong New Year's. So you said that you found surprisingly a lot of acceptance.
Yeah, but I also want to
Yeah.
uplift that. Yeah, I mean there's
Not
always
to paint a
caveats
giant
and-
rosy. I mean, it's complicated,
Yeah, it's
right?
super complicated. It's super complicated. The whole time I was there in the front, did I see any elders come and sign it? Right? I've seen a lot of youth who came by and signed it. I've seen a lot of folks who had, and I just because I know them and some of their backgrounds, right? They have some kind of educational background and they're older than me, and they came and signed it, and they were I love you and support you, right? And I love that, and I'm super supportive of that. And for us to get ready for that, we actually did a training in de-escalation because we were so afraid, because one of our members actually went through conversion therapy. Yeah, right? Because Hmong communities, not only are they Hmong shamanism, but some of them had to convert just to immigrate over, right? They had to convert into Christianity, Catholic, whatever, right? But some of them actually went through conversion therapy, and actually the church is actually the place of the most toxicity. And so we were preparing for the worst. We knew that those folks exist walking around the Hmong New Year's as well, and we were hoping that they wouldn't come over to us and talk with us. But was also like we were expecting the worst and then we were given like the best. We had so much mixed emotions that it just was there and we just didn't know how to deal with it, and everybody was very emotionally drained. So
It's amazing that you're doing that work. Vana, go back to you. Sorry.
You know, I know you asked the question. I think you're trying to hint at the.
Well, I was trying to see if it's the same or not.
Yeah. So I want to say I just want to comment on when you asked Shai, like, have you seen a change over time, right? When as I think what you're trying to get at is, has acculturation empowered our communities to be more accepting. I also want to illuminate that sometimes the American ways of doing things is more harmful, and I have seen that in my community. So it is actually going back to my community and our religion that has actually saved me in many ways, and even being Buddhist has been my protective factor in my sexuality and in my queerness. So sometimes the American way of doing things is actually more harmful than liberating. So I just want to acknowledge that. But also too, I am Khmer. I come from a matriarchal background. My mom holds the pants in her marriage with my father. In our culture, when they marry, the men move into the woman's family home. What are you gonna do? Disrespect her in front of her brother and her dad? So there's a lot of power that the woman holds in the family. There's a saying in Khmer, what was the saying called? It means like no matter what, the mother would never abandon her child. So if the mother accepts the child, and she does, because she usually what I've seen, because in our culture the mother did not abandon her child. It's coded, in that saying that gets passed down from generation to generation. The male's position on it is mute, because he is in her domain. It is her home. He is surrounded by her family members. So the woman has a lot of power, and if the woman accepts the child, and in most cases I've seen, they do, because they've been taught to abandon their kids. The child is protected, and in many ways, because there's 3 of us in my family. There's 7 of us, 3 of us. So that's like almost half of us. So in many ways, my culture has been my protective factor, not the American way of doing things. So all that to say, you can find tools sometime, right underneath your nose. And so listening to everyone else, I realized I am fortunate, and maybe this is why I'm so attached to my ethnic community, because in many ways I have found safety in them. And I was just at the temple the other day, and I like going to the temple because I have never felt, and I've been a monk before, I've never felt like this huge backlash. And this isn't to say that everybody in the community is accepting, especially now with us being in exile here in the U.S. empire. Some folks have really bought into the American ideology and some of them have become more over time patriarchal, because let's face it, America is very patriarchal. And so you're starting to see these change in power dynamic between the genders, right? But so all that to say, like, and then there are some Khmer folks who are Catholic or Christian or Mormon, right? Because some of them feel like they owe a debt to the sponsors and stuff like that. So it's very complex and complicated. It's not one shoe fit all. But I can say that from my experience and my siblings' experience, it's been we've been fortunate, if you will. But it's not, and then also too, Khmer is a very diverse group. We have been a hybrid and very diverse group since inception. The birth of the Khmer nation was from the marriage between an Indian prince and a Naga princess. So from the very beginning, we've always been very diverse and hybrid. So then that means some folks might be Khmer Jin, which is like Khmer Chinese, or Khmer Muslim, right? So their experience might be different than my experience.
So is your country of origin different from everybody else?
So when we think about those are topics I can go on and on about. But you know, it's hard to say. So I want to acknowledge that the motherland have been colonized before, and they have and the French have created arbitrary borders and stuff. But then we've always had minority groups who live amongst us, if you will. So there's that in short.
Yeah, sure.
Right, so I work with a lot of LGBT, queer, trans at FSO State, and a lot of them that go to our cross-culture dream center and attend queer talks, you know, they're coming in from the Bay or SoCal, and it's kind of getting on hookup culture. And they feel like it's very liberating because they can be their authentic self here and at Fresno State, and like when I hear them talk, they're like, oh, I can't wait to go to the club, I can't wait to drink, I can't wait to download Grindr or do this because I'm free. I don't have to hide myself. So what advice would you give them on, because I feel like they're teetering a line of hyper sexualization and fetishization, because they talk about that too, especially since a lot of them are BIPOC, and a lot of the individuals that that are hitting them up and stuff fetishize them, and they talk about that, but I'm like, what advice could I give them to navigate and, you know, find a healthy balance?
Yeah. So my advice to you in terms of you know, so I'm going to be I try not to be too explicit, if you will, especially when talking about sexuality. But I will say this: let your students know that they have agency. And that they deserve to be respected as well. So all this to say, you know, I'm not going to pretend that I have never engaged in the fantasies, if you will. You know, in some instances it serves me, but that's my agency, you know. But when but then there has to be some boundaries, because sometimes it gets to a point where I'm commodified in a way that it's not mutual anymore. You know, if it's mutual, then it can be empowering. Because, you know, I have used Orientalism in a way that serves me, in ways that empower me. But there are some instances where it's not mutual, and you know when it's not mutual, but you don't feel safe anymore. And in those instances, the students should know if they don't feel safe, they don't feel comfortable, then it's not mutual anymore, and or they need to get out there, or they need to let that person know, like, hey, this is not okay. But I want to uplift their agency, because you know, it is what it is. And so for me, it's like, how do we use certain things to our advantage, or in a way that serves us? Like, for example, you know, with the political system we live in, I don't agree with everything that the Democrats do, but but it's just kind of like our health, right? Sometimes you have to make decisions on how to minimize the damage, how to minimize the pain, how to minimize you know, the toxic stuff, or the harm. And so I vote Democrat because I'm hoping to minimize the systemic issues that you know, marginalized folks face with. But that doesn't mean that we're going to get rid of all of it. It's just the hope is to minimize. So to me, I use those tools to minimize, or to leverage, or to maneuver it in a way that serves me. So let them know they do have agency, because sometimes it's easy to forget that they do, you know?
I can speak to that as a trans person who has been on hookup apps and things like that, but also like in the community when people do find out. There are what I call chasers, and they're people who essentially chase after a certain demographic. And there are a lot of chasers for trans people. And, you know, I would say, like, have them figure out what their own red flags are. Like, what they accept and don't accept. Because sometimes, like, you don't know in the beginning. Like myself, I didn't know, like, I didn't realize how harmful or dangerous it can be when, like, people like that, you allow them around. And so, like, you know, and then also identifying, are they a chaser, are they fetishizing you, or do they not have the right terminology and not educated? Because I've also had to figure that out. So figuring that out, knowing what their boundaries are, knowing what they're comfortable with, and not going back to them just because they feel like that's the desirability from the fetishization is the only form of love or compassion or sensuality that they'll get, because it can feel like that in, you know, a place where you're new, or, you know, you're coming into yourself and you're not sure, you know, you've never been shown, you know, love or acceptance. And I was actually having a conversation about that earlier today. You know, finding people who accept you for yourself can sometimes be conflated with love or lust, and you don't realize the difference until when you're no longer in that situation. So understanding who they are, what they're comfortable with before getting into that, because I can tell you there have been multiple times where like I lost myself in those things, where I was like, I don't feel safe, this isn't comfortable, this person isn't safe. And it was because I didn't have the tools or somebody to have that conversation with. So just also like, if they do come to you and like are willing to be open, like don't judge them. That is also one thing that I experienced. Like I would try to go to somebody to talk about it and they're like, well, you brought it on yourself, messing with people who like are chasers or whatever the case may be. So like just being open-minded and not judging anybody. Like I try to live by like, you do what makes you happy, and you know, just harm reduction. Do what also is safe, the safest option.
I'd like to say to Alexandria, you have a beautiful, open, happy, joyous spirit.
Thank you.
Yes.
And that's very, very refreshing.
Thank you so much. It takes a lot. You have no idea.
I actually wanted to add on to your question. So I'm a very sex positive person. We live in a society where things like, you know, heterosexual and, you know, dating just to marry and abstinence are like the dominant ideologies. And that really governed how I was looking for relationships at the beginning, and then I realized that that wasn't what I wanted. So when people ask me about stuff like this, I tell them to just do things that, you know, safety of course, but that's also consensual. But I think it's good to be able to explore, like sexually, those kind of avenues to see what you might like, especially with gay or queer people, where we were, you know, told that like, oh, this is unnatural, this is a deviant behavior, this is unholy. So we were denied that things, and once we do come out, now we have to find ourselves. So we have to unlearn the things that we were taught, and we're finding who we are and the things that we like. So most of my adulthood was doing those things, especially sexually. So that's sort of the advice that I kind of give people when they ask about sex. As long as it's safe and consensual, and it's something that you want to do, then the world is your oyster.
So for me, I discovered myself a lot through my partners. A little history about myself. My father was kind of in and out of my life. So I had a single mom, and I have 2 other sisters. So a lot of the times I didn't feel like I was seen. So when I did come of age, I was promiscuous. I just wanted love anywhere that love found me. And it wasn't always the best thing for me. And sex was one of the things that I learned, that, you know, it's okay to have sex. It's okay to want sex. It's okay to naturally be sexual, like to be sexual. But the thing is, you have to be careful about who you let inside your energy. You have to be careful about the energies that you share, because they can either bring forth creativity, or they can drain your creativity. And that is one of the things that I say as like a 27-year-old woman. I'm still learning, you know. I like sex, but at the same time, everybody doesn't belong, like they don't deserve your body. They don't deserve your soul. They don't deserve to have you, because at the end of the day, you are the prize. but if you don't see yourself as that prize, you're gonna always try and make yourself that option. You should never be an option baby.
That is a great statement. Shai, you want to say anything? Are you good?
Yes and no, but I just really wanted to say, like, I really agree with Dion. It's just a lot of, like, I think systematically, like, queer people have always been policed about, like, love and who we can love, and so bringing that back out, right? Like, how does this all then connect to, like, our systems of oppression? And so just wanting to uplift that and, like, yeah.
Awesome.
I have a quick question. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
So it's been really great listening to all of you, by the way. Thank you guys for sharing. Very insightful. I'm in a graduate master's program for counseling, and I decided to do some research on the LGBTQ community because I feel like that's where I don't really have a lot of knowledge in. So I wanted to, explore and become a little bit more insightful. And my question kind of, I want to go back to, when you guys were younger in school, because I will be working with eventually high school students, for example. What are some of the challenges that you guys faced when you were in that stage of high school, and challenges, and then what are some of the things that were helpful? For example, like your school provided support programs or groups that kind of helped you guys get through that.
Before anybody answers the question, because I'm not going to answer first, thank you for doing that, because a lot of people only, when they go through these counseling programs and these social work programs, only go towards training that they already know, and they want to fortify something they already know. They don't go towards something that they're not comfortable with or they don't know. So thank you for that. But you guys can answer. I just wanted to say that.
This one, it kind of hit me right in my heart. So, I experienced a lot of colorism when I was in high school. Like, I used to walk around imagining myself as a light-skinned woman, knowing damn well I'm chocolate as hell. And it took me a long time to really even understand. Like in middle school, I was teased for being so dark. They used to call me Midnight. They used to call me things like, like when they turn the light off, they're like, where you go? Like things of that sort. And I didn't really realize how much it took a toll on me. Sadly, I don't think it was really anything that my high school really did for me. It wasn't until I got out of high school and I moved to Fresno a day after my high school graduation, and I feel like my life just took off its own course. And I learned to love myself, because if I don't love myself, nobody else will. And I have nieces and nephews that's in high school right now that's being bullied for just being gay, or just simply just wanting to be themselves and just like want to live edgy. And it's just like, it's a damn shame that I know kids they only repeat patterns that they're seeing at home. So I know that hurt that they were giving me wasn't something that it was directed towards me, but it wasn't for me. It was something that they were taught. So if anything, colorism and just overall just kids judging kids. No, because even they didn't know themselves, but their families they always repeat what their families taught them. And that's something that I don't have any kids, but I make sure my nieces and nephews know, like, one, don't be bullying nobody. I'm gonna come for you. And two, just make sure you live unapologetically, because in the end, you're gonna be in that grave. You're the one you live your life every day. You wake up every day, and it's just like those are your experiences, and nobody can ever take that from you. So, yeah.
I guess I'll touch up on that too, because that was an experience I had too.
We're gonna find all these kids.
Being one of the only people of color, history class was such a drag, especially when we talk about slavery, and everyone would just turn back and look at me like I was there. Or sex ed was hard too, because it was really focused on heterosexual relationships. I didn't really learn about that until I got to college. I took a sex ed class, and my teacher, who was queer, was the one who started introducing it and educating me about it, and then I could go to them to ask questions. I think when I was younger, the only time they talked talked about kind of queerness and sex ed was HIV, saying that gay men are more likely to have it. So the resources that were given at my high school, I didn't use them. It was mostly just like my friends and stuff who were my support group, or some like people who I could find like you know, acceptance at. So I think that what schools can do is just be more inclusive with their curriculums and how they teach things, and to provide those resources for students or even faculty who might be experiencing hardships because of their sexual orientation or race or any of their identities.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing it. Like for me, for example, this was very insightful because I never really realized the different, like you guys talked about, and like it's not just the LGBT community, but also your race also influences the different. And I never really thought about that. I always just figured, everyone in the LGBT community just gets along, because they relate on that. And
Be in a room with us.
Yeah. Yeah, but that goes back to me not obviously, being knowledgeable or talking, with people who are in the community. But so that's why I really like thank you guys. It's been very insightful, and I like it.
Thank you for that question.
I can add a little on that. Coming from a very small rural town that was also very religious, like a large portion of the community was Catholic, and there was only one Catholic church because it was so small. So the district can get away with a lot of things, like serving things that were like for Lent, when they're not supposed to be doing that, and but they wouldn't accommodate the Muslim students and not offering something that was important. So the bias there, but in regards to, like I said, like all of us knew who was gay, like who was queer, but a lot of the cishet kids, the kids that weren't gay or queer, also knew, or assumed, based off of more specifically the guys that I grew up with who were more feminine. They're like, oh, using slurs so young, both in English and in Spanish. And I'm the kind of person that, like, Spanish, it holds a different weight for me, and it's a lot more hate behind those words. And I wish, I'll be 100% honest, the only reason we had sex ed was because a 6th grader got pregnant when I was in 5th grade. And that whole story is not my business to tell, but that's the reason why they brought sex ed, and it was called Project Compass. I remember that because the only thing they talked about to us was pregnancy, and like how people give birth, and like how big a cervix opens, things like that. And I'm like, I already knew this because my mom has like 1,000 kids. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. There's only 4 of us. She ain't gonna watch this. And so that was the only sex ed that we got. And then when we got into junior high, it was like, oh, again, pregnancy. That's what they focused on. Like the sperm meets the egg, and that's how you make a baby. And you don't get an abortion because that's horrible. Again, religious based. There was never any mention about like, racism that we knew was there, because Latinos are very racist, very colorist, even within our own community, and then also very homophobic. Like a lot of folks, because of their religion and because of their culture, obviously I can only speak from what I experienced and what I've witnessed. A lot of folks are very homophobic, very anti-LGBT. So that's what allowed for the bullying, because let's be honest, that no bullying, no tolerance bullshit doesn't fucking work. It's not realistic, and especially in communities where I'm from, and I'm sorry that I cuss so much, but I feel very heavily about this because I saw kids get bullied so badly that they dropped out of school in 7th grade. They dropped out of school because they were bullied so badly for, these boys were bullied so badly for being feminine. Had the school just done something as simple as we're gonna have a conversation and be the difference between expression, now we have different phrases for them, so gender expression and sexuality and things. Even if they had just been look, people are different, and you're gonna have to like put up with it and leave these people alone, or you're getting kicked out. That would have been a lot more helpful than their no bullying campaigns is what I call them, because like they're more like in my head political campaigns. So like had they had education in such a small town, it would have prevented a lot of kids. Like there was kids who committed suicide, and so it would have prevented a lot of the violence that would have happened if the adults were not also perpetuating those stereotypes and that violence. So you listening to us is like a step in the right direction, and like being open-minded and knowing that you don't know everything, and wanting to actually make change while you're in those spaces is like, we need more people like that.
This is something very small. I also want to say that it's super important that we also activate our youth, that they have power. As much as they are also implementing racism and also are then observing how our systems of racism and are then implemented to them and how they are also using it, other students can also step up and to deny that. Students have power, and it's about activating them to recognize that students and youth and all of these young folks have power in them to say something. Yes, like fucking teachers are fucking like, they're stupid as fuck sometimes.
No, really.
Let's just admit it.
Yeah, but recognizing that youth can come together, they have power. And this is about them practicing their power as youth so that they can be activated continually throughout their lives.
So we have to wrap it up. We've gone over time, which means that we should have another panel. Which means that, but I want to, and so for all of you who have other questions, we can ask after this. So I just want to first give a round of applause and a sincere thank you to all of our panelists for giving your time, your energy to this.